On a cold morning of January 7th, 1844, in the small town of Lourdes in southern France, Bernadette Soubirous was born, the eldest child of a poor but deeply Catholic family. Her parents, François and Louise, lived modestly, supporting themselves through humble jobs and facing adversity with resignation and faith. From an early age, Bernadette's health was fragile. She suffered from chronic asthma and other respiratory illnesses, making her physically delicate. Even so, she demonstrated a firm and determined soul, endowed with a sweetness and humility that shone through even in her most painful moments. The Soubirous family went through extreme poverty. When Bernadette was only 10 years old, they were forced to live in an old, abandoned prison called the Cachot, a damp, dark and unhealthy place, a symbol of the destitution they faced. Yet neither poverty nor illness stole the little girl's hope. Despite these hardships, she grew up with a simple but profound faith. Her intelligence was limited in the world's eyes, for she had little formal education and could barely read or write. Nevertheless, her soul was formed in the eternal truths of the Christian faith, taught within her family and at the small local parish. By the age of 14, Bernadette had still not made her first communion. This was due to her difficulty memorizing the catechism, compounded by her lack of schooling. Even so, she ardently longed to receive Jesus in the Eucharist, pleading for this grace with tears and constant prayers. On February 11th, 1858, Bernadette went out with her sister and a friend to gather firewood along the banks of the Gave River. As she approached the Massabielle grotto, she was overcome by a luminous vision. A lady dressed in white, with a blue sash and a rosary in her hands. It was the beginning of a divine mystery. The lady, silent during the first apparition, smiled at Bernadette, inviting her to pray the rosary. The girl, frightened but calm, knelt and began the prayer with faith. When it ended, the vision disappeared, leaving in her heart an inexplicable peace and a burning desire to return. In the days that followed, Bernadette returned to the grotto, drawn by an inner impulse she could not resist. During each apparition, the lady addressed her with simple words, yet laden with profound spiritual meaning, calling for prayer, penance, and the conversion of sinners. The local and religious authorities responded skeptically to the girl's accounts. Interrogations, threats, and humiliations were frequent. Still, Bernadette stood firm, always repeating with humility, "I am here to tell, not to make them believe." During 18 apparitions between February and July of 1858, the Virgin Mary revealed herself to Bernadette as the Immaculate Conception. The girl, who did not understand the theological meaning of the expression, repeated it to the priests, confirming the truth of the dogma proclaimed only 4 years earlier. In one of these visions, Our Lady asked Bernadette to dig into the ground of the grotto with her own hands. From there sprang a clear fountain whose existence no one knew of. Since then, this fountain has become a place of grace and inexplicable healings, a visible sign of divine action. Thousands of people began flocking to the grotto. Some were driven by faith, others by curiosity. Meanwhile, Bernadette remained out of the spotlight, refusing any form of prominence or glory. Her only wish was to obey the Lady and live hidden in God. Persecution intensified. Doctors examined her, authorities pressured her, trying to disprove what had happened. But there was no contradiction in her testimony. Her simplicity and firmness moved even the most skeptical. Bernadette did not invent anything. She only recounted what she saw and heard. Her spiritual life deepened. She spent hours in prayer, meditating on the Virgin's messages, offering herself as a victim of love for so many who did not know God or rejected Him. The cross of misunderstanding and poverty became her daily altar. The local parish priest, initially unbelieving, was converted by the fruits that began to appear. Confessions increased, the faithful returned to Mass, and Lourdes gradually became a sanctuary of living faith. God's hand was revealed through little Bernadette. Bernadette, however, never felt special. She repeated that Our Lady had chosen the most ignorant and weakest to manifest her glory. This awareness of being nothing, this self-emptying, is what made her so great in God's eyes. The Massabielle grotto was cordoned off, and the church began to investigate the events more seriously. A canonical process was opened, witnesses were heard, doctors consulted. Everything indicated the authenticity of the phenomenon. The divine presence was undeniable. While Lourdes was being transformed, Bernadette longed for a hidden life. She felt uncomfortable with her involuntary fame. "I am a broom," she said, "that Our Lady used and now has placed behind the door." Her desire was to disappear so that only God would shine. In 1866, Bernadette joined the congregation of the Sisters of Charity of Nevers. There, she exchanged the fields of Lourdes for the cloister of the convent. Religious life would be for her a new Calvary, marked by illness, humiliations, and long interior silences. In the convent, she did not speak of the apparitions unless permitted. She was treated with some distrust by certain sisters who did not understand why God would choose an illiterate peasant for such a sublime mission. Bernadette accepted everything with docility and silence. Her work in the convent was simple, caring for the infirmary, washing clothes, doing embroidery. Even with her fragile health, she did not complain. She saw each small task as a way to love God and serve her brothers and sisters, uniting everything to Christ's sacrifice. Her physical sufferings increased. Bernadette suffered from bone tuberculosis, causing her excruciating pain. Still, she kept a gentle smile and a serene gaze. Her patience edified all those around her, and her presence exuded a peace that came from above. The Mother Superior once asked her what she did when her suffering was great. Bernadette answered simply, "I offer it to God. He knows better than I what I need." This total surrender to the divine will was the essence of her sanctity. Despite the pain, Bernadette kept a light sense of humor and a deep charity toward everyone. She did not care for sentimentality or drawing attention to herself. Her gaze was always turned to heaven, where she knew she would one day be reunited with her Lady. Little by little, the young woman from Lourdes was consumed like a candle before the Blessed Sacrament. In the silence of the convent, far from crowds and miraculous healings, she offered her life as a hymn of love to God and a living testimony of what it means to belong entirely to Mary. The convent of Saint-Gildard in Nevers became Bernadette's final earthly home. There she would live in anonymity until her death, embracing the cloister as a new calling from God, where silence spoke volumes and suffering became a source of grace. The apparitions at Lourdes, though still fresh in people's memory, were carefully forgotten by Bernadette. She said, "The Virgin chose to appear to me not because I was holy, but because I was the most ignorant. God writes with crooked lines." The infirmary of the convent was her mission field. There she cared for the sick sisters with motherly dedication, even when her own health declined severely. The spirit of service was constant, and each simple gesture reflected a supernatural love. Many came to the convent expecting to find a mystic or seer. Instead, they found a simple, modest nun who shunned any attention. Bernadette refused titles and privileges. She did not want to be celebrated but forgotten, like Christ on the cross. Humility was the hallmark of her soul. When asked about the apparitions, she answered only what was necessary, avoiding any kind of self-exaltation. She remained firmly rooted in the truth. Everything was the work of God and Mary, not hers. One of Bernadette's greatest sufferings was the misunderstanding of her fellow sisters. Some treated her with disdain, seeing her as some sort of enlightened person. The Mother Superior, although devout, exercised a severe discipline, continually testing the young nun's obedience. Once, a sister said to Bernadette, "You saw Our Lady, and now you're washing the floor." She answered with a smile, "Our Lady taught me humility, and there's no small service when it's done out of love." These words reveal her spiritual maturity. Her heart was inflamed with love for the Eucharist. Mass and adoration were the most precious moments of the day. There, she united her suffering with Christ's sacrifice, offering herself as a living host in every gesture, every pain, every silent prayer. During prayer, Bernadette entered a profound recollection. Her eyes seemed lost in the infinite, as though contemplating an invisible reality. These were not ecstasies, but an intimate communion with the Lord and with Mary, who sustained her in every trial. Her illness advanced, slowly consuming her body. Bone tuberculosis, continuous fevers, asthma attacks, and constant pain made her existence a prolonged martyrdom. Yet no complaint passed her lips. She offered her suffering with love. Doctors tried to alleviate her pain with the remedies available at the time, but there was little they could do. Bernadette, with a patience that touched everyone, said, "It is better to suffer with Jesus than to live without him." Her faith was the only effective medicine. Accounts of healings in Lourdes multiplied. People from all over Europe made pilgrimages to the grotto where Bernadette had seen Our Lady. They immersed themselves in the water from the miraculous fountain, and many returned cured in body and renewed in soul. Bernadette, however, never sought these cures for herself. She never asked the Virgin for physical health. Her only plea was that she might love more, suffer more generously, and remain faithful to the end, like a useless servant of the Lord. Her spirituality was deeply rooted in the Passion of Christ. She meditated on the sorrowful mysteries of the Rosary with tears. She said that each thorn of her suffering was a rose offered to Mary. Thus, she sanctified herself in each moment of the day. Over time, her presence became a source of edification in the convent. Even the most skeptical sisters began to see in her a model of heroic virtue. Her gentleness, steadfastness, and silent self-offering transformed the environment around her. Bernadette's correspondence with her family was scarce. She missed them, but she understood that her mission now was different. In her rare letters, she expressed her spiritual union with her parents and siblings, asking them to remain faithful to prayer and the sacraments. The Bishop of Nevers, informed of the nun's condition, visited her. He was impressed by her serenity and spiritual wisdom. He recognized her not only as the visionary of Lourdes, but also as a genuinely contemplative soul, a hidden martyr of love. During the last months of her life, Bernadette could no longer walk. She was carried with care, and even bedridden, she held a rosary in her fingers, praying fervently for all those who commended themselves to her prayers. News of her illness spread. Many people sent prayer requests, and Bernadette responded with silent offerings. She said, "I can no longer serve with my hands, but I can with my heart." Thus, she interceded for the afflicted. Her confessor attested to the depth of her soul. He had never noticed in Bernadette any sign of spiritual vanity or pride. She was transparent, obedient, and completely submissive to God's will, a living example of the gospel. At the age of 35, Bernadette was visibly close to the end. The doctors declared that nothing more could be done. Her pains became unbearable, but she received them as blessings. She said, "All this will pass. Only heaven remains." On Good Friday of 1879, Bernadette was seized by a violent crisis of pain. She spent the night in agony, united to the Passion of Christ. At dawn, she murmured, "Jesus, Mary," and entered into a brief ecstasy as if already beholding the eternal glory. On April 16, 1879, at 3 in the afternoon, the hour of Christ's death, Bernadette gave her soul to God. She died with a crucifix in her hands and a smile on her lips. The sisters, in tears, recited the creed around her. Her death was met with deep emotion. Word of her sanctity spread quickly. She, who considered herself God's little broom, became an example of humility, patience, and fidelity to grace. Lourdes and the world gained a powerful intercessor in heaven. Bernadette's body was buried in the Neva convent. Years later, during the exhumation processes, it was found incorrupt, as a sign of divine favor. Her face, serene and unblemished, still appeared peaceful, as though she were merely sleeping. The discovery of Bernadette's incorrupt body deeply moved the Church. The miracle was not immediately proclaimed, but the signs of divine grace were evident. The young woman's flesh remained intact, with no sign of decomposition, even decades after her death. 3 exhumations took place in 1909, 1919, and 1925. In all of them, the body was found in an extraordinary state of preservation. Doctors and ecclesiastical authorities who witnessed these events were astonished, for there had been no embalming or natural explanation for the phenomenon. Bernadette's face, covered by a thin wax mask for preservation, remains peaceful and serene to this day, a reflection of the pure soul that, even after death, continues to display the presence of God who dwelled within her. Her tomb was opened as part of the beatification process. The Church, prudent and vigilant, rigorously investigated her life, virtues, and the miracles attributed to her intercession. What they found was not just an incorrupt body, but a life wholly consumed by love for God. During the canonical trials, dozens of witnesses recounted the spiritual fruits generated by her life. Convent sisters, doctors, pilgrims, and even skeptical authorities acknowledged that something extraordinary shone forth from that young woman of Lourdes. On June 14, 1921, Pope Benedict XV declared Bernadette's heroic virtues, recognizing her life as a model of gospel sanctity. The little peasant girl, humble and sickly, became a universal example of faith, hope, and charity. The miracle of the Lourdes grotto continued to grow. Thousands of physical healings and spiritual conversions were reported over the decades. The Church, ever cautious, officially recognized some of these cures as miraculous, always following strict medical and theological scrutiny. On December 8, 1933, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, Pope Pius V proclaimed Bernadette Soubirous a saint of the Catholic Church. This confirmed that her life, hidden from the eyes of the world, shone bright before the throne of God. The canonization was celebrated with joy by the faithful worldwide. Lourdes, already recognized for the Marian apparitions, also became the birthplace of a saint chosen by heaven to proclaim to the world the mercy and purity of the Immaculate Virgin. The life of Saint Bernadette continues to inspire millions. Her simplicity, her surrender, her silent obedience reveal a spirituality that transcends time. It is a call to all the faithful to live their faith with humility and trust. Her incorrupt body rests in the chapel of Saint Gildard in Neva, exposed for public veneration. Pilgrims from all parts of the world go there, moved by faith, seeking the intercession of the one who saw the Virgin and lived as a faithful daughter of the Church. Bernadette's face remains young, calm, radiant. Her closed eyes still seem to contemplate the Lady of the Grotto, while her body rests as a visible sign of the hope of resurrection, the promise of Christ to those who faithfully follow him. Saint Bernadette's spirituality is marked by 4 pillars: humility, obedience, offered suffering, and love for the Virgin Mary. In each of these aspects, she lived heroically, becoming a brilliant example for all who desire to follow Christ. Her famous phrase, "I have not come to make people believe, but to tell," encapsulates her prophetic mission. She did not argue or debate. She simply bore witness. Her authority came from the truth she lived, not from words or theories. Bernadette is also a model of the interior life. Even though she was a visionary, she never sought extraordinary manifestations. Her faith was anchored in silence, in persevering prayer, in performing her daily duties. This makes her even closer to every ordinary Christian. In Lourdes, the Massabielle grotto became a place of miracles and conversions, yet it is above all a place of prayer. There, where Mary appeared to the little Bernadette, heaven touched the earth and continues to touch the hearts that open themselves to grace. The water from the spring that emerged at Our Lady's request is a symbol of baptism, of spiritual purification, of new life in Christ. Bernadette, as she dug the ground of the grotto with her hands, became an instrument of salvation, not just physical, but above all spiritual. Saint Bernadette teaches us that true holiness does not lie in great deeds, but in faithfulness in small things. Washing the floor, caring for the sick, enduring pain, praying with love. These were the rungs of her ladder to heaven. Her life is a testimony against pride and self-sufficiency. In a world thirsty for fame and recognition, Bernadette shows us the path of hiddenness, of radical humility, of total trust in divine providence. Saint Bernadette is also a saint of the cross. She endured misunderstandings, illnesses, abandonment, and humiliations. And she lived all this with an inner joy, because she knew that, united to Christ, every pain becomes redemptive and every tear a powerful prayer. Her love for the Virgin Mary was filial, tender, and trusting. She called her my lady, but also my mother. And even when the vision ceased, she felt accompanied by the maternal gaze of the one who had appeared to her in the grotto, dressed in white. The Marian devotion that arose in Lourdes is not sentimentalism, but a call to conversion. Through Bernadette, Mary asked for penance, prayer, and a return to the sacraments. Saint Bernadette lived out this appeal faithfully until her last breath. She did not seek glory in this life. She refused to be painted, interviewed, or praised. She preferred the convent's anonymity to the crowd's fame. This choice is, in itself, a prophetic witness for our times, where the ego constantly seeks applause. Saint Bernadette still intercedes for us. Her example is a beacon for those who suffer, who are ignored, who are poor, who are ill, who are humble. She is the saint of total trust, of wholehearted surrender, of the little way of love and the cross. In each devout gaze that contemplates her image or her incorrupt body, there is an encounter with hope, the certainty that God chooses the little ones to confound the great, and that the kingdom of heaven belongs to those who become like children. Saint Bernadette's legacy transcends her era. Her life, silent and hidden, is a perpetual echo of the gospel message. In a world marked by haste and noise, she teaches the value of recollection, of interior listening, and of God's abiding presence. Young people find in her a surprising model. Though of poor origins and frail health, Bernadette never gave in to discouragement. Her strength came from an absolute trust in the Virgin Mary and total adherence to the will of the Most High. In Lourdes, the grotto remains silent yet speaks. It is a silent testimony of a mother's appearance to her daughter. And Bernadette, now a saint of the Church, remains the invisible guardian of that sanctuary where heaven was revealed with such tenderness. The sick who go to Lourdes do not find only physical healing. Above all, they find spiritual consolation. They follow in Bernadette's footsteps, who, in her silent suffering, discovered the redemptive meaning of pain when united to the heart of Christ. The spirituality of Lourdes is profoundly Eucharistic. It was in the grotto that Mary asked for prayer and penance, and it is in the Eucharist that the faithful find the strength to respond to this call. Bernadette knew this and lived on the Eucharist as the nourishment of her soul. Fidelity to the Church was a deep mark of her life. Even when questioned, humiliated, and discredited, she never rebelled against ecclesiastical authority. Her love for the Church was an extension of her love for Christ and Mary. The message of Lourdes does not bring new doctrines, but simply reaffirms the beauty of what the Church already teaches: the Immaculate Conception, the need for conversion, the importance of the Rosary, and the value of penance. Bernadette was the faithful messenger. Her interior life blossomed in obedience. For her, obedience was more than a duty. It was a path to union with God. Obedience to convent rules, to the orders of her superiors, and to the interior voice of conscience sanctified every moment of her existence. Bernadette had heavenly visions, yet lived firmly on earthly ground. She never lost herself in mystical reveries. She washed clothes, cared for wounds, and scrubbed floors. Her sanctity lay in small things done with extraordinary love, the secret of the great saints. She is also remembered for saying, "I am responsible for telling, not for making people believe." This attitude reflects her trust in God's action and her detachment from outcomes. She did her part with humility. The rest she left in heaven's hands. In a time of rationalism and unbelief, God chose an illiterate girl to manifest one of his greatest signs of loving presence. Bernadette's wisdom did not come from books, but from prayer and intimacy with God. Saint Bernadette shows that holiness is possible for everyone. One need not be a theologian, missionary, or founder. It is enough to love, to suffer with faith, to obey with humility, and to pray with perseverance. Her life is an answer for those who think holiness is out of reach. Devotion to Saint Bernadette grows every year. Churches and chapels are dedicated to her, and thousands choose her name for baptism and confirmation. Her example continues to shape souls and inspire vocations, especially in religious and consecrated life. Many seminaries and convents present her life as a model of perseverance. Her battle against illnesses and the temptations of discouragement gives courage to religious men and women who face similar trials on the path to holiness. The prayer of the Rosary was a constant in her life. From the first encounter with the Virgin to her last breath, Bernadette never let go of her Rosary. She is frequently depicted with it in her hands, a symbol of her surrender and fidelity. Her death itself was a witness of peace and hope. She died with her eyes turned to heaven in prayerful silence, giving herself as she always had, a holy death, worthy of the life she led, marked by faith, love, and self-abandonment in God. Lourdes remains the largest Marian sanctuary in Europe and perhaps in the world. This is due to the fidelity of a young woman who, by saying yes to grace, became heaven's spokesperson. Saint Bernadette is the hidden soul behind every miracle received there. Pope John Paul II, deeply devoted to Mary, visited Lourdes several times and called Bernadette a model of purity and courage for our time. She still speaks to hearts today with her simple yet intensely radiant life. Saint Bernadette is, finally, an icon of the mystery of God's choice. God does not choose the strong but the small, not the wise of the world but the humble. In her the logic of the gospel shines through. The last shall be first in the kingdom of heaven. Her holiness does not lie solely in having seen Our Lady, but in having responded perfectly to the grace she received. How many see signs and remain unchanged? Bernadette saw, believed, obeyed, and loved, even in absence and suffering. For those who suffer, Bernadette is comfort. For the poor, she is hope. For the simple, she is a sister on the journey. And for all of us, she is a living reminder that holiness is within reach of those who surrender entirely to the heart of God. She is also the patron saint of those who are ridiculed for their faith, of the sick, of humble workers. Far from any worldly glory, her life shines with God's glory. She is a light kindled by the Mother of Heaven to illuminate the darkness of the earth. The fruits of her life continue to multiply. Stories of conversion, healing, and return to the faith accumulate at the grotto's feet. Saint Bernadette is the bridge between heaven and earth, between Mary's love and humanity's thirst for God. In our current times, when so many seek extraordinary signs, Bernadette reminds us that the greatest miracle is simple faith, that the greatest gift is to remain faithful in small things, that true glory is living hidden with Christ in God. And so, the girl from Lourdes, who died at 35 in a distant convent, remains alive in the Church. Saint Bernadette Soubirous, example of humility, messenger of the Immaculate, intercedes for us and teaches us to be little, so that God may be everything.